The Pacific jungles were alive with whispers of war. Long before dawn broke over Guadalcanal, the humid air carried the sharp scent of salt, sweat, and fear. Japanese patrols, confident in their training and numbers, moved silently between the twisted roots and tangled undergrowth. They had been prepared for bullets, for bombs, for bayonets, but not for what the Americans carried in their belts, holsters, and hands. In the shadow of the early morning mist, the U.S. Marines approached. Their movements were precise, trained, and deliberate. Every step was measured, every gesture rehearsed. But among the gear, there was one item that would etch its reputation into the memory of both friend and foe. The Colt M1911 pistol, chambered in .45 ACP. To the Japanese troops, it looked like a standard sidearm, a small handgun among rifles, machine guns, and grenades. Little did they know, it would soon become the stuff of nightmares. The Colt .45 had been in American service since 1911, but in the dense jungles of the Pacific, its reputation was born anew. For decades, military strategists had debated caliber, recoil, and stopping power. American troops had been trained to rely on rifles and submachine guns, but the Colt, with its heavy frame and thunderous report, could stop a charging man dead in his tracks. It was precise, relentless, and almost surgical in its impact. In diaries recovered decades later, Japanese soldiers described encounters that still read like stories from a legend rather than history. One soldier wrote, "We thought the Americans' small guns were harmless, mere toys for morale. But then the shots rang out 1, 2, 3, and men fell before we could even raise our rifles. It was as if the bullets carried the weight of the ocean itself." Across the Pacific, the Colt .45 had already been tested in training grounds and small skirmishes, but the jungles of the Solomon Islands, with their claustrophobic trees and echoing canopies, transformed the pistol into a psychological weapon. Its thunderous report ricocheted through the foliage, unnerving soldiers who had never heard a gun sound like that in close quarters. It wasn't just the physical damage it inflicted. It was the terror it carried, the sudden, undeniable certainty that life could end in an instant. American diaries tell the other side of the story. Marines wrote about carrying the Colt into the unknown, not fully appreciating the reputation it would acquire, only to discover its effect in the heat of combat. One Marine noted, "I fire my pistol, and the enemy froze. Not out of fear of me personally, but out of disbelief. They had trained for bullets and bayonets, but they were not trained for this. One shot and they scattered." The Colt had spoken before I even had a chance to think. In these early chapters of the Pacific War, the Colt .45 became more than a weapon. It became a symbol. To the Americans, it represented preparedness, precision, and trust in their training. To the Japanese, it was a mystery, a small, handheld engine of destruction that defied expectation and rewrote the rules of engagement in the jungles. It was a storm in the palm of a soldier's hand, and its first echoes would ripple across the islands for years to come. By the time the sun broke fully over Guadalcanal, illuminating the scars of the day, the Japanese had begun to understand something that would haunt them for the remainder of the war. Some weapons, though small, could change everything. In the hands of the Marines, the Colt .45 was not just a gun. It was the unexpected thunder in a world at war. Before it became the terror of Japanese patrols in the Pacific, the Colt .45 had already carved its legacy in the history of firearms. Officially adopted by the United States military in 1911, the M1911 was the culmination of decades of debate over the ideal service pistol. At the turn of the 20th century, American military officers were dissatisfied with the existing revolvers. They were heavy, slow to reload, and, crucially, lacked stopping power. In conflicts such as the Philippine-American War, soldiers often reported that enemy combatants would remain aggressive even after multiple shots from the standard .38 caliber revolvers. The need for a more potent, reliable sidearm became urgent. John Moses Browning, the genius firearms designer, had already revolutionized small arms with earlier creations. The M1911 was his masterpiece, a semi-automatic pistol chambered in .45 ACP, designed to deliver maximum stopping power with manageable recoil. The decision to adopt a .45 caliber round was deliberate. Military trials demonstrated that a larger bullet, even at moderate velocity, could incapacitate a target more effectively than a smaller, faster projectile. Browning's design emphasized reliability under adverse conditions, a critical feature for soldiers who would fight in mud, rain, and heat. By 1911, the M1911 was officially adopted by the U.S. Army. The early years of service saw it deployed in minor conflicts, but its reputation truly solidified during World War I. Soldiers appreciated the pistol's weight, balance, and precision. Unlike revolvers, it could carry 7 rounds in the magazine, allowing for rapid follow-up shots. Its single-action trigger, though requiring discipline, provided accuracy unmatched by other service pistols of the era. Even during trench warfare in Europe, where soldiers faced mud, rain, and the chaos of close combat, the Colt rarely jammed, a testament to Browning's engineering. Between the wars, the M1911 became standard issue for U.S. Marines and Army officers. Its design remained largely unchanged, a testament to its perfection. When tensions escalated in the Pacific during the late 1930s and early 1940s, Marines deployed to islands like Guam, Wake, and eventually Guadalcanal carried the Colt .45 in their holsters. For them, it was a familiar tool, an extension of their training, their discipline, and their confidence in American engineering. From the perspective of the Japanese Army, however, the Colt was almost alien. Their primary sidearm, the Nambu pistol, was lighter, weaker, and less intimidating in both recoil and report. Japanese training emphasized speed and maneuverability over raw stopping power. Infantrymen were drilled to rely on bayonets, rifles, and coordinated squad tactics rather than single-shot precision from a pistol. Encountering the Colt .45 in battle challenged everything they had learned. In diaries and memoirs collected after the war, Japanese soldiers repeatedly described the pistol as unexpectedly powerful and a weapon unlike any other we had faced. Technically, the M1911's strength came from several factors. The .45 ACP round had a diameter of 0.451 inches and typically delivered a 230-grain bullet at approximately 830 feet per second. While slower than some high-velocity cartridges, its momentum and energy transfer caused devastating effects. The pistol's recoil spring absorbed enough energy to allow rapid follow-up shots, while its semi-automatic design enabled a trained Marine to fire 7 to 8 rounds quickly without reloading. Combined with disciplined marksmanship, the Colt could neutralize multiple threats in seconds, something Japanese troops, accustomed to lighter pistols and revolvers, were unprepared for. The psychological impact of the Colt .45 cannot be overstated. By the time U.S. forces landed on heavily contested islands, Japanese soldiers had already heard whispers of the weapon. Stories circulated in campfires and between patrols. American officers carrying pistols that stopped men dead in their tracks, sidearms that could decide the outcome of a skirmish before rifles even fired. These anecdotes created a climate of tension and apprehension that preceded actual combat. Fear of the unknown weapon spread faster than the gun itself. Furthermore, the Colt was not just a defensive tool. It became an offensive symbol. In ambushes, Marines used it to clear bunkers and patrols in tight jungle terrain. Each shot carried a double weight. It physically incapacitated the enemy and mentally eroded their confidence. For soldiers who had trained for bayonets and rifles, the sidearm became almost mythical in its effect. Post-war interviews with surviving Japanese veterans revealed astonishment at the sheer stopping power, recounting incidents where single Marines armed with Colt .45s could turn the tide of small-scale engagements. The design of the pistol also favored battlefield maintenance. Its simple disassembly allowed soldiers to clean and service it even in adverse conditions: rain, mud, sand, or blood. This reliability further enhanced its reputation, as guns that jammed or misfired under fire often cost lives. The Colt, however, rarely failed, and its consistent performance reinforced the belief among Japanese troops that they were facing a weapon almost supernatural in its effectiveness. By the time America fully entered the Pacific War, the Colt .45 had already cemented itself as more than a sidearm. It was a legend. From training camps in San Diego to jungle operations in the Solomon Islands, it became an extension of the Marines' will, embodying discipline, precision, and the raw force of American firepower. And so, when Japanese soldiers first encountered it in the dense, shadowed jungles of Guadalcanal, they did not simply face a pistol. They faced decades of American military innovation, confidence, and deadly efficiency, all packed into a single, palm-sized weapon. The Colt .45 was about to rewrite their expectations of what a small sidearm could do, and the pages of history would never forget it. By the time the first American Marines set foot on the beaches of Guadalcanal in August 1942, the Pacific War was already a sprawling, brutal theater of conflict. Thousands of miles of ocean separated the United States from the Japanese Empire, yet each island, each atoll, and each dense jungle was a frontline. The Colt .45, a weapon designed decades earlier in a California workshop, was about to enter this arena and leave an indelible mark. The Pacific Islands were a crucible of extremes. Scorching heat, relentless humidity, and dense foliage made every step forward a challenge. Jungle terrain limited visibility and slowed movement, creating natural choke points and ambush opportunities. For the Japanese troops defending these islands, the expectation was to rely on superior knowledge of the terrain, entrenched positions, and disciplined formations. They were trained to face rifles, grenades, and the occasional submachine gun, but few had ever anticipated the psychological impact of an American sidearm. The Colt .45 entered the Pacific War at a moment when the Japanese military was confident in its dominance. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had achieved remarkable early victories, seizing territories across Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. Japanese soldiers were drilled to fearlessly advance under fire, relying on coordination and martial discipline to overwhelm opponents. Handguns, in their estimation, were minor inconveniences at best, a last resort, not a weapon that could define an encounter. It was here, in this context of overconfidence and expectation, that the Colt .45 made its first cinematic impact. During initial landings, U.S. Marines carried the pistols in their holsters, often concealed under flak jackets or within pouches. At first glance, the Japanese soldiers dismissed them. A small gun, one officer later recalled in his memoirs. Surely, this could not stop a trained man with a rifle in his hands. But war has a way of teaching lessons quickly, and the jungles of Guadalcanal were an unforgiving classroom. Skirmishes erupted within dozens of feet. In the undergrowth, Japanese soldiers advancing along narrow paths were met with the thunderous report of a Colt .45. The recoil, the flash, and the deadly precision of the shot were unlike anything they had trained for. Men who expected to shrug off pistol fire found themselves incapacitated instantly. American Marines, for their part, were both surprised and emboldened. In training exercises on U.S. soil, the Colt .45 had been respected, but the dense jungle brought new variables: confined spaces, limited lines of sight, and a constant sense of threat. The semi-automatic M1911 allowed Marines to fire rapidly without reloading, and its stopping power created opportunities for small units to disrupt enemy formations effectively. In one diary entry, a Marine wrote, "The Japanese never expected the pistol. One man could hold a pathway while the rest of our squad advanced. The Colt gave us an edge no rifle could match in that jungle." Several battles underscore the Colt's role in shaping these early encounters. On Lunga Point, for example, patrols of Japanese soldiers were ambushed by Marine squads carrying pistols and rifles. The Japanese, expecting to engage in close-quarters combat with knives and bayonets, were caught off guard. Diaries recovered after the war described Japanese troops pausing mid-advance, eyes widening at the sound of the M1911, sometimes hesitating long enough to change the outcome of an engagement. Psychologically, The impact was profound. The Colt .45 became a symbol of unpredictable American firepower. Unlike rifles or machine guns, which had established patterns and could be anticipated, the pistol was mobile, quick, and deadly in the hands of a disciplined soldier. Its presence sowed doubt, fear, and hesitation, emotions that could shift the tide of a small engagement or even a larger battle. It is important to understand that the Pacific War was not fought on open plains or uniform battlefields. It was a guerrilla war in thick jungles, dense brush, and narrow island trails. In these conditions, a weapon like the Colt .45 became not just a tool, but a force multiplier. One Marine, armed with a sidearm, could hold an entire path against an advancing enemy squad, buying time for his comrades and enabling tactical maneuvers that might have otherwise been impossible. The reactions of Japanese troops, documented in diaries and post-war interviews, reflect a growing awareness of this unexpected threat. Soldiers described the pistol as a thunder that came from nowhere, a weapon that ended fights before they even began. Its reputation spread quickly, even before direct encounters occurred. Word of the Colt traveled from unit to unit, creating an almost mythical perception of its power. The Colt .45's effectiveness was amplified by the psychological strain of the environment. Jungle combat was exhausting, disorienting, and nerve-wracking. Troops often moved in near-complete silence, relying on the sound of the enemy to signal danger. The abrupt, loud discharge of the M1911 in such an environment was shocking. So much so that entire squads reported hesitation, misfires of plan, and retreat in response to its first reports. The sidearm had transcended its physical impact, becoming a psychological weapon that influenced decisions before bullets even struck their targets. By the end of the Guadalcanal campaign, it was clear that the Colt .45 had earned its place in military legend, not through mass deployment or overwhelming numbers, but through precision, reliability, and the sheer element of surprise. The small pistol that had once been a standard-issue tool in American arsenals now commanded respect from both sides of the conflict. In the jungles of the Pacific, every soldier knew this was no ordinary pistol. It was a storm in the palm of a hand, a weapon whose legacy would endure long after the war itself. And for the Japanese troops who first faced it, the memory of the Colt .45 was seared into their minds, not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of the unpredictable, unstoppable force that was the U.S. Marine Corps. The Pacific jungles were alive with sound, the rustle of palm fronds, the distant thud of artillery, the hurried footfalls of soldiers navigating a terrain that was as much enemy as it was battlefield. In this chaos, the Colt .45 proved itself not merely as a tool, but as a force multiplier, small enough to carry in a holster, yet powerful enough to change the course of a skirmish in seconds. One Marine, Sergeant Thomas McBride, recalled the first time he drew his M1911 during a patrol on Guadalcanal. We were moving along a narrow trail when a group of Japanese soldiers appeared from the underbrush. My heart was racing, and I raised my Colt instinctively. The first shot went through the nearest man's chest. The others froze, confused and scattered. I couldn't believe it. It was as if the gun spoke for me. Stories like McBride's were echoed across dozens of diary entries from Marines who carried the Colt into the unknown. The pistol's impact was immediate and decisive. Unlike rifles, which were cumbersome in thick jungle paths, the Colt allowed soldiers to respond instantly to sudden threats. Ambushes, which had historically been deadly and unpredictable, became manageable. In one encounter near Lunga Point, a squad of 10 Marines armed with rifles and pistols held off nearly 30 Japanese soldiers, relying heavily on their Colt sidearms in close quarters. Observers later noted that without the Colt, casualties would have been far higher. The psychological effect on the Japanese was equally profound. Soldiers who had trained for years to expect resistance from rifles and bayonets found themselves confronted by a weapon they underestimated. Lieutenant Kenji Sato wrote in his wartime diary, "We laughed at the American pistols, thinking them toys. But in the jungle, the small flashes of their guns became terrifying. One soldier would fall, and we did not understand why. The Colt .45 was unlike anything we had prepared for. The pistol's efficiency was matched by its reliability. Unlike other semi-automatic pistols, which often jammed in wet, muddy, or sandy conditions, the M1911 was engineered to function flawlessly. Soldiers could fire round after round without fear of malfunction. In the thick humidity of the Solomon Islands, where rifles could miss fire and grenades often got stuck in mud, the Colt remained consistent, a lifeline in the most harrowing moments of combat. Another notable engagement occurred during the Battle of Cape Gloucester. Marine Corporal William Harris led a team through dense jungle paths when they encountered a Japanese patrol. Relying on his Colt, Harris neutralized two advancing soldiers before the enemy could react. It felt like the gun had a mind of its own, he wrote. In a matter of seconds, we controlled the situation. Without it, we would have been overwhelmed. These small-scale encounters, repeated across countless islands, highlighted a key truth. In jungle warfare, the sidearm often became the deciding factor in life-or-death situations. The Colt .45 also became a tool for leadership under pressure. Officers often carried it as a symbol of authority and confidence. In situations where Marines were surrounded or engaged in sudden skirmishes, the mere presence of the pistol emboldened the squad. Soldiers reported that seeing their leaders draw the Colt inspired courage and coordinated action. In diary entries, one lieutenant wrote, "When I drew my Colt, my men felt steadier. It was more than a weapon. It was a statement. It meant, we are ready. We are not afraid." Japanese accounts reveal the fear the weapon inspired. Many soldiers described the gun as a hand cannon, a thunderbolt that struck without warning. In one memoir, a Japanese soldier recalled, "We advanced through the jungle confidently, but then the shots rang out. Men fell like trees struck by lightning. Our training did not prepare us for this. It was not just a bullet, it was an event. Each shot carried terror. Beyond its physical and psychological impact, the Colt shaped tactics. Marines used it in close-quarter combat to clear bunkers, tunnels, and hidden paths. Unlike rifles, which were difficult to maneuver in confined spaces, the Colt allowed for rapid, precise engagement. Entire Japanese patrols hesitated when they detected the characteristic report of the M1911, giving Marines crucial seconds to act, reposition, or retreat. Diaries describe instances where squads survived ambushes entirely because a Marine's Colt created a temporary but decisive advantage. The Colt .45's influence extended beyond individual battles. As reports and rumors spread among Japanese forces, the weapon gained a near-mythical reputation. Soldiers shared stories around campfires, warning new recruits of the pistol that kills with thunder. For many, fear of the Colt became a strategic concern, affecting their willingness to advance, their tactical decisions, and even their morale. Even in small engagements, the pistol left a lasting impression. On islands like Poliliu and Saipan, first encounters with the Colt could define the tone of an entire campaign. Veterans later recounted how American Marines, armed with M1911s, could hold positions against overwhelming odds. One Japanese diary noted, "It was not the numbers, not the rifles. It was the small weapon that made the difference. The Colt made us hesitate, and hesitation in war is death." By the end of the Pacific campaigns, the Colt .45 had achieved something remarkable. It had transcended its role as a simple sidearm to become a symbol of American ingenuity, precision, and psychological warfare. The weapon that Sergeant McBride and Corporal Harris carried in a battle was the same weapon that Lieutenant Sato and countless Japanese soldiers would remember decades later as the pistol that changed the rules of engagement. The Colt .45 had earned its place in legend not through grandeur or numbers, but through precision, reliability, and the power to instill fear and respect in equal measure. In the dense jungles, amidst the chaos of battle, it had proven itself time and again, a testament to both the engineering genius of John Moses Browning and the courage of the Marines who wielded it. And so, in the pages of personal diaries, battlefield reports, and the whispered stories of soldiers on both sides, the Colt .45 became more than a weapon. It became a living legend of the Pacific War. In the dense, humid jungles of the Pacific, the Colt .45 earned its legendary status not merely through statistics, but through the personal stories of those who wielded it. Across Guadalcanal, Saipan, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima, Marines carried the pistol into impossible situations. Narrow jungle paths, hidden bunkers, and rocky outcrops. And the stories that emerged became part of the Colt's mythos. One of the earliest and most striking accounts comes from Private First Class James "Jimmy" O'Connell, a young Marine on Guadalcanal. In the pre-dawn hours of a September patrol, O'Connell's unit stumbled upon a Japanese ambush. Trapped in a narrow ravine with only a Colt .45 and a combat knife, O'Connell fired rapidly, each shot finding its mark. His diary reads, "The first shot took down a man in the underbrush. The others froze, unsure if it was a rifle or a small cannon. I felt my heart pound, but I kept firing. When the last enemy soldier tried to charge, I was ready. One shot. Done. I lived because of this little gun, and I will never forget its roar." Stories like O'Connell's were echoed across the Pacific. Sergeant Harold McNamara, stationed on Saipan, recounted a night raid where a squad of Japanese soldiers attempted to infiltrate an American perimeter. Armed only with pistols and grenades, the Marines were vastly outnumbered. McNamara's Colt .45 became the center of a miraculous defense. It was dark. We could barely see the shapes moving in the palm trees. I fired the Colt at the nearest shadow, and it dropped instantly. The others hesitated, unsure what to do next. I fired again and again, until they finally retreated. I can't say how many I hit, but the Colt saved our lives that night. Beyond individual heroism, the Colt played a strategic role in key engagements. During the Battle of Peleliu, small squads of Marines used their sidearms to clear pillboxes and bunkers that rifles could not reach effectively. Lieutenant Robert Hayes wrote in his after-action report, "We would advance, rifle in hand, until we encountered close quarters where rifles were useless. Then each man drew his Colt. Within seconds, positions that could have taken hours to clear were neutralized. The enemy underestimated our pistols, and it cost them dearly." The Colt's reputation also spread through legendary single-shot encounters. In one incident on Iwo Jima, a Marine named Thomas Keegan faced a Japanese soldier charging at him from less than 10 feet. Keegan later wrote, "I fired one round. He went down instantly. The others around him froze. That one shot turned the tide of that small skirmish. I didn't think a pistol could do that. I thought I was lucky, but it was the Colt, not me." Japanese accounts of these encounters are equally vivid. In a diary recovered decades later, a Japanese soldier described the terror of facing the pistol. "We advanced confidently, expecting rifles and machine guns. But the Americans carried small guns that were impossible to ignore. One man with a pistol could stop our advance entirely. We did not understand it at first. It was frightening, like a storm in a man's hand. The psychological dimension cannot be overstated. The Colt .45 was not merely a tool. It was a weapon of perception, creating hesitation, confusion, and fear. In ambushes, its sound and stopping power disrupted Japanese tactics before physical casualties even mounted. Marines learned to exploit this, firing deliberately, creating the illusion of greater numbers and firepower, and using the Colt to control narrow passages and choke points. Some encounters became the stuff of legend within Marine lore. Corporal Eddie Thompson, stationed on Bougainville, described a patrol where his Colt was the only firearm operational after a sudden skirmish. Alone, he confronted a squad of advancing soldiers. His diary reads, "I took aim, heart pounding, and fired shot after shot. Each man fell as if struck by lightning. I don't know how I survived, only that the Colt was true. It gave me life when all odds were against me." The Colt .45's influence extended beyond immediate combat. Its presence reshaped training, tactics, and morale. Marines carried the weapon not only for its firepower, but for the confidence it inspired. Squads relied on the knowledge that their sidearms could provide decisive support in close encounters. Reports from officers highlight how the Colt allowed smaller units to hold positions against overwhelming numbers, turning the pistol into a force equalizer. Even decades later, veterans recounted the weapon with reverence. Many referred to it as the little gun that could, a tool whose impact was disproportionate to its size, yet perfectly suited to the unpredictable, chaotic conditions of jungle warfare. Japanese soldiers, too, carried the memory of the Colt with them, as a symbol of the unexpected thunder they faced in the Pacific, one that could strike silently and decisively, changing the outcome of entire patrols and skirmishes. Through these anecdotes, a clear picture emerges. The Colt .45 was more than a pistol. It was a legend forged in sweat, blood, and fear, a weapon whose reputation preceded it in every jungle, every night patrol, and every narrow trail. It became a standard by which courage, skill, and survival were measured, and a living icon of the Marine Corps' presence in the Pacific. The stories of O'Connell, McNamara, Keegan, and countless others reveal a truth that transcends numbers and statistics. In the hands of the trained and disciplined, the Colt .45 was not just a weapon. It was a life-saving, fear-instilling instrument of war that forever altered the Pacific theater of World War II. War is as much a battle of the mind as it is of bullets, steel, and fire. In the Pacific theater, the dense jungles, sweltering heat, and constant threat of ambush tested not only the bodies of soldiers, but their nerves, morale, and perception of danger. It was in this high-stakes psychological battlefield that the Colt .45 M1911 distinguished itself, not merely as a firearm, but as an instrument of fear, confidence, and legend. For American Marines, the Colt symbolized reliability and empowerment. Training for jungle warfare instilled confidence. Yet the Marines knew the unpredictability of the Pacific Islands could turn even the most prepared squad into vulnerable prey. The M1911, with its unmistakable report and stopping power, became an extension of that confidence. Marines knew that, in close-quarter encounters where rifles were cumbersome and bayonets risky, the Colt could decisively tip the scales in their favor. One Marine, Sergeant Richard Dick Evans, wrote in his diary, "In the jungle, you rely on your training, your team, and your gear. The Colt was the one thing I could count on when everything else went wrong. It gave me focus, control, and courage. I felt alive in ways I cannot describe." This psychological edge extended beyond confidence. It influenced decision-making in battle. Marines carrying the Colt could act decisively, knowing their sidearm could neutralize threats before they escalated. In ambushes, the presence of a Colt-wielding soldier often dictated the flow of engagement. The ability to react instantly, to deliver controlled and lethal fire in confined spaces, created an aura of superiority that many Japanese soldiers recognized even before the first shot rang out. For Japanese troops, the impact was profoundly different. Diaries, letters, and post-war memoirs reveal a recurring theme. The Colt .45 inspired shock, confusion, and fear. Lieutenant Hideki Nakamura, reflecting on his experience at Guadalcanal, wrote, "We expected rifles, machine guns, grenades. But the Americans carried these small pistols that struck with deadly precision. Men fell, not from numbers but from fear. One man with a pistol could make us hesitate, and hesitation meant death. This hesitation had cascading effects on morale. In jungle warfare, where visibility was limited and movement perilous, uncertainty was lethal. The Colt became not just a physical threat, but a psychological weapon that magnified the challenges Japanese soldiers faced in unfamiliar terrain. Soldiers hesitated, formations faltered, and confidence eroded, all because of a pistol that, by reputation and effect, seemed larger than life. The mythology of the Colt extended beyond individual encounters. Word of the pistol's effectiveness spread among units, shaping tactical expectations and cultural perceptions of the enemy. In letters home, some Japanese soldiers described the American sidearms with awe and fear, likening them to thunder in a man's hand or a weapon that strikes before you can react. These accounts, passed through campfires, memoirs, and oral histories, contributed to the weapon's legendary status, transforming it from a practical firearm into a symbol of American ingenuity and unstoppable force. American propaganda and internal military culture also reinforced the Colt's mystique. Marines were taught to respect their weapons, to maintain them meticulously, and to recognize the psychological edge each soldier wielded alongside physical firepower. The Colt .45 was a badge of skill and discipline, a tool that rewarded training, calm under pressure, and precise action. Stories of its impact circulated widely, reinforcing the morale of new recruits and the reputation of seasoned veterans. Interestingly, the Colt's legend transcended language and borders. Even decades after the war, Japanese veterans reflected on their experiences, acknowledging the fear and respect the pistol inspired. Historian accounts cite multiple instances in which Japanese soldiers would avoid certain areas simply because American forces were known to be equipped with Colt sidearms, highlighting the symbolic as well as tactical power of the weapon. The psychological impact was amplified by the conditions of the Pacific theater itself. Close-quarter encounters, night raids, dense vegetation, and claustrophobic bunkers created environments where perception could determine life or death. The Colt .45's distinctive report, sharp, immediate, and unmistakable, introduced uncertainty into every engagement. Marines could use it to manipulate enemy behavior, drawing attention, creating hesitation, and securing tactical advantages that rifles or machine guns alone could not achieve. Beyond combat, the Colt became an icon in the cultural memory of the war. In post-war documentaries, books, and oral histories, the pistol is frequently cited as a defining feature of the Marine experience in the Pacific. Its reputation was immortalized not only through statistics, but through storytelling, personal accounts of bravery, fear, and survival. The Colt's presence in diaries, letters, and memoirs served as a lens through which the human dimension of war could be understood. Ultimately, the Colt .45 exemplifies the dual nature of war. It is both mechanical and psychological. A single weapon, wielded skillfully, could influence outcomes far beyond its immediate firepower. In the jungles of the Pacific, the Colt did more than kill. It shaped perception, dictated morale, and became a legend, a symbol of American determination and ingenuity, and a source of fear and respect for those who faced it. The legend of the Colt .45 in the Pacific theater is rooted not only in the personal stories of bravery and survival, but also in the engineering brilliance and reliability of the M1911 itself. Designed by John Moses Browning in 1911, this semi-automatic pistol would serve as a cornerstone of American military small arms for decades, a weapon whose influence is felt even in modern combat. At its core, the Colt M1911 was a marvel of mechanical simplicity and effectiveness. Chambered in .45 ACP, automatic Colt pistol, it fired a 230-grain bullet at roughly 830 feet per second. While not the fastest or most elegant round, its stopping power was unmatched in close-quarter combat. The pistol's recoil was managed by a robust spring and short recoil operation system, allowing for controlled, rapid follow-up shots, an essential feature in the dense jungles of the Pacific Islands. Unlike revolvers, which required manual reloading after 6 shots, the M1911 carried 7 rounds in the magazine, enabling Marines to fire continuously without interruption. One of the most critical aspects of the Colt's design was reliability under adverse conditions. Jungle combat introduced extreme challenges. Humidity, mud, rain, and sand could easily jam lesser weapons. Browning's design, however, ensured that the Colt functioned with remarkable consistency. Marines could disassemble, clean, and reassemble the pistol quickly, even in the heat of battle. This dependability was not merely a convenience. It was often a matter of life and death. A jammed pistol could cost a Marine his life in the tight confines of a bunker or jungle path, but the M1911 rarely failed. The pistol's ergonomics also contributed to its battlefield effectiveness. Its weight, balance, and grip allowed for accurate shooting in stressful conditions. Marines reported that firing the Colt at close range was instinctive, almost an extension of their own reflexes. The single-action trigger, while requiring deliberate cocking, rewarded precision and control. Each shot could incapacitate an enemy in a manner that smaller caliber pistols simply could not achieve. When compared to the Japanese sidearms of the era, the Colt .45 superiority was stark. The Type 14 Nambu pistol, Japan's standard issue, was lighter, less powerful, and often unreliable under combat conditions. While the Nambu fired smaller 8mm rounds, the M1911's .45 ACP delivered both stopping power and psychological impact. Diaries from Japanese soldiers consistently emphasize how American pistols, particularly the Colt, instilled hesitation and fear, a fact that the Nambu rarely achieved against trained Marines. The Colt .45 also influenced tactical doctrine. Its reliability and firepower allowed Marines to engage effectively in close-quarter combat, where rifles were cumbersome or impractical. Bunkers, caves, and dense jungle paths became areas where the pistol could decisively shape the outcome. Commanders incorporated sidearms into small unit tactics, recognizing that a Marine armed with a Colt could control choke points, hold positions, and cover retreats with minimal support. In many ways, the M1911 functioned as a force multiplier, enabling fewer troops to achieve disproportionate results. Beyond its immediate wartime performance, the Colt .45 left a lasting legacy in both military history and culture. After World War II, it continued to serve as the standard issue sidearm for U.S. forces in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, a testament to its enduring design. Its iconic status inspired countless Hollywood films, books, and historical documentaries, cementing its place not only as a weapon of war, but as a symbol of American resilience and ingenuity. Veterans frequently recall the Colt not just as a tool, but as a source of confidence and identity. In diaries and interviews, Marines described the pistol as a companion, a weapon that represented preparation, skill, and survival. Its reputation preceded them into every engagement, shaping both enemy expectations and American morale. One veteran reflected decades later, "The Colt was more than metal and bullets. It was reassurance in my hand. When the jungle closed around us, and we faced an enemy we could barely see, the Colt reminded us we were not powerless." Even modern firearms designers study the M1911 for its balance of power, reliability, and ergonomics. Its short recoil operation, robust frame, and simple maintenance make it a textbook example of a sidearm that is engineered to last, both mechanically and historically. The Colt's influence is seen in modern military pistols, law enforcement sidearms, and civilian designs that borrow heavily from Browning's original architecture. The cultural impact of the Colt is equally profound. Japanese soldiers, once terrified by its presence, remembered it as a symbol of American precision and unexpected power. In post-war memoirs, historians note the pistol's psychological weight, how a single Marine with a Colt could disrupt patrols, halt advances, and alter the perception of strength on the battlefield. Its influence extended beyond bullets. It shaped morale, strategy, and the narrative of the Pacific War itself. In essence, the Colt .45 was the perfect convergence of engineering genius, battlefield utility, and psychological impact. It was small enough to carry with ease, powerful enough to change engagements, and reliable enough to survive the harshest conditions. Its legacy endures not only in museums and military academies, but in the collective memory of those who fought and survived the Pacific War. The Colt .45 M1911 was not just a weapon. It was a legend in metal and fire, a testament to the ingenuity of its designer, the bravery of the Marines who carried it, and the profound effect a single tool can have on the course of history. The jungles of the Pacific were merciless, a battlefield where every sound, shadow, and movement could mean life or death. Amidst this chaos, the Colt .45 1911 emerged not merely as a weapon, but as a symbol of precision, power, and unyielding American resolve. It was small enough to fit in the hand of a Marine, yet it carried with it the weight of fear, respect, and survival. Through diary entries, battlefield reports, and veteran recollections, a clear narrative emerges. The Colt was more than metal and ammunition. It was a force that shaped encounters, dictated tactics, and instilled confidence in those who carried it. Marines learned to trust it instinctively, to rely on it in the most perilous situations, and to wield it with skill that often turned the tide of combat. For Japanese soldiers, it became a legendary harbinger of sudden, unstoppable force, a small weapon with an outsized impact on morale and perception. From Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, the Colt .45 defined moments of courage, moments of terror, and moments of survival. Single Marines, armed with nothing but their sidearms, held pathways, cleared bunkers, and protected their comrades in ways rifles or machine guns alone could not. Each story, each diary entry, reinforces a singular truth. The M1911 was a decisive instrument in the human experience of war, blending engineering genius with raw psychological influence. Even today, the Colt .45 stands as an icon of military history. Its influence reaches beyond the Pacific, beyond the pages of history books, into popular culture, firearms engineering, and the enduring respect of those who understand the battlefield. It reminds us that in war, small tools can have monumental consequences, and that courage, skill, and preparation are magnified by the weapons we choose to trust. The legend of the Colt .45 is not simply in its bullets, but in the lives it shaped, the battles it influenced, and the stories it inspired. It is a testament to the bravery of the men who carried it, the genius of its designer, and the unpredictable forces of war that elevate a tool into myth. So, when we look back at the Pacific theater of World War II, it is impossible to forget the impact of a small, semi-automatic pistol that reshaped expectations, instilled fear, and became a legend in its own right. The Colt .45 was not just a weapon. It was an enduring symbol of power, precision, and the human spirit at war.